Chinese officials are reacting to reports that China interfered in the last Canadian federal election. The investigation by the Globe and Mail is stoking fresh tensions between Beijing and Ottawa. Chinese consulate in Vancouver has expressed its annoyance, tweeting a statement saying the allegations printed in the Globe amount to, quote, smearing and discrediting China. And it goes on to say China has never interfered in any Canadian election or internal affairs in any way. The Globe and Mail says the story is based on secret documents from CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. The newspaper says they show that China employed a sophisticated strategy to influence the vote. Now, CBC News has not seen these documents, but the Globe report says the documents suggest that China had two clear goals: to ensure a minority Liberal government was elected and to defeat certain Conservative candidates. Public Safety Minister Bill Blair spoke about the matter earlier today with CBC News' chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton.
When I was the Public Safety Minister in December of 2020, I actually tabled a very public report, a 12-page report, outlining the threat of foreign interference in a number of elements of our society, including the integrity of our elections. I sent that letter. I sent a copy because I wanted every member of Parliament to be aware of it, and I tabled it publicly, and it's available on the Public Safety website. And so, you know, I appreciate that people have read the Globe and Mail, but frankly, my parliamentary colleagues should also read their own mail and reflect upon that information. In 2019, we passed a Modernization of Elections Act, which created some very significant new offenses. And in the letter that I sent out to parliamentarians and have posted publicly, we very clearly identified the threat that Chinese interference poses to our economy, to our public institutions, and to our elections. Talked about the things that our government and all of its national security agencies were doing, and I think we've done a lot of work. There's clearly a lot more to be done, but we also created an expert panel to review our elections in 2019 and in 2021, and they have both reported to us quite independently that those activities, although they were very closely monitored and concerning, did not affect the outcome of the election.
Okay, so that's the government's perspective. But opposition leader Pierre Poilievre alleges that the Prime Minister knew about the claims of Beijing's meddling. And here's what he had to say on Friday.
Justin Trudeau knew about this interference, and he covered it up because he benefited from it. He is perfectly happy to let a foreign authoritarian government interfere in our elections as long as they're helping him. And according to the Globe and Mail story today, this foreign authoritarian government wanted to see Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister because they knew that he would work for their interests rather than Canada's interest. And that's why he's covered up this information for so long.
Okay, let's get some analysis from Charles Burton, who is a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and a former Canadian diplomat to China. Charles Burton, always good to have you on the show, sir.
Great to speak with you.
So, Charles, you just heard those two clips. We've got Minister Bill Blair saying, listen, don't worry about it. It's under control. We're on top of this thing. The Prime Minister said a couple of days ago they might have tried to interfere. They did not impact the outcome. And then you've got the opposition leader saying they knew about it and they don't seem to care. What's the reality from your perspective?
Well, I think the Globe and Mail report is highly credible, and it backs up a lot of things that we've suspected in the course of those two elections, particularly the rather triumphalist statements by the Chinese Consul General in Vancouver, who suggests that Chinese disinformation and influence peddling and coercion was instrumental in the defeat of two Vancouver area candidates. I think, you know, we know that the report of CSIS has been given to the Five Eyes, our intelligence sharing partners, and various other intelligence agencies. Whether the Prime Minister saw it or not, I can't say. But it doesn't seem to have been transferred over to the RCMP, who could then do an investigation and lay charges and, I guess, propose to the government that certain Chinese diplomats who are engaged in these sorts of activities should be sent back to Beijing. And certainly the claim that it didn't have any impact on the results of the election, I don't know how you make such a claim. I don't know if the Chinese influence was instrumental in certain candidates losing their seats or not. We really can't tell why people vote the way they vote, but the idea that there was an extensive well-funded illegal program of Chinese government-backed interference in our democratic process is clear, and no action that I can see has been taken because there have been no court cases and no diplomats that have been sent home. I should say that, the Chinese diplomatic cohort in Canada is very large. They have 146 people accredited to Canada compared to 46 for Japan, 35 for India, and 23 for the United Kingdom. And so one cannot help but suspect that a significant proportion of those Chinese diplomats are involved in these sorts of influence peddling, disinformation, and coercion of persons of Chinese origin here in Canada to serve the purposes of the Chinese regime and not the purposes of Canada.
Charles, can you give me some examples, please, of what this program of coercion or influence looks like? What did they do, allegedly?
Well, the Chinese Communist Party has what's called the United Front Work Department, which is considered one of the three central elements of the work of the party, the others being party building and the armed struggle. And so, the Chinese ambassador to Canada is the head of the Chinese Communist Party branch in the embassy, and he is therefore responsible for overseeing the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Work Department work in Canada. And so they are involved in trying to get Canadian officials to feel that if they don't criticize China while they're in positions of trust, that they may receive benefits from China-associated boards and law firms and opportunities after they leave office. They are involved in disinformation. We now know that the disinformation about, for example, the candidate from Richmond Stevenson, Chenny Chu, was coordinated by the Chinese government and wasn't a function of, say, Canadian citizens who hold a certain view. They provided a kickback scheme, whereas proxies who donated money to Canadian political candidates could take their tax receipt to the consulate and be reimbursed for, the amount that wasn't tax deductible. So, that's highly illegal. And I think, if the government was aware of this, even if they claim it had no significant impact on the outcome, that these sorts of illegal activities coordinated by a foreign power absolutely should not be tolerated. And, the RCMP should have been empowered to take action. But, since 2019 and 2021, we haven't seen any action whatsoever. And this disturbs me greatly.
That is exactly where I wanted to go next, sir, because you and I previously have spoken about the global news reporting on Chinese interference in the 2019 election. So what are Canadians to make of the way our federal government is responding to these reports and repeatedly saying it's not having any impact on the results?
Well, I think that I don't understand the basis of them saying it didn't have any impact on the results. I really don't think that you can assess that in any way, because we have a secret ballot, and why people go to the polling station and why they decide to support one candidate against another is not something which we're able to to establish. I think that certainly the idea that this doesn't really matter is, completely and utterly wrong. We really cannot a foreign power to interfere in our democratic process or to try and influence people in positions of trust. So instead of acting for Canadian purposes, they're acting for the purposes of a foreign power that's giving them benefits. This is just not the Canadian way.
So play out that storyline for me, Charles, if you would. Okay, so maybe it's a couple of candidates in one federal election, and if this goes unchecked and there are no criminal consequences and there are no diplomatic consequences, then where does this continue to go? How much more interference could we see?
Well, if there are no consequences for the agents of the Chinese state, then it will embolden them to do much more of it, obviously, because they're able to fully get away with it. I think that the fact that people inside CSIS or some elements of government are prepared to allow journalists to see highly classified documents is suggestive that there's a split in government between the security agencies that are very concerned about this and our political center in the Prime Minister's office and so on, that don't want to take any action, maybe because they're concerned that China will retaliate economically against this as a consequence, and it'll impact on some Canadian interests. But you know, this sort of activity that's been revealed by the Globe and Mail is explosive, and the fact that people inside CSIS are giving out materials to Bob Fife and Steve and Sam Cooper suggests that there's a sense of high, deep concern within CSIS that they would violate their commitment to the Official Secrets Act, and indeed put whoever is doing this seriously at risk of very serious political criminal charges.
So much more I want to ask you, sir, but we'll save it for the next conversation. Charles Burton, great to speak with you.
Great to speak with you too. Hope we can do it again soon.
You too. Take care.